Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar, The Strategic Importance of Software Asset Management, and thank you for joining. We will be recording this webinar and sending it out afterwards. The presentation will be about 20 to 30 minutes with a Q&A to follow. Everyone's microphones are muted. If you have questions, please feel free to ask them at any time in the questions section. We will answer questions at the end of the presentation. Now, I would like to hand it over to Todd and Selena, who will be taking us through today's presentation.
Good afternoon, everybody. This is Todd Alcock. First and foremost, I personally wanted to welcome everybody to this webinar. We're all probably sitting at our desks at home, and hopefully we will entertain you for the next 30 minutes. I am responsible for our software asset management practice at Converge. I have been in the software industry. As you can tell by my picture, I'm no spring chicken. So I've been doing this for about 30 years. The first couple of decades were selling software to enterprise customers. And for the last decade, I have been leading our software asset management practice. So today's session is going to be a quick overview of what we do, how we do it, and why we do it. And the strategic partnership that we have with Anglepoint is one of the most strategic across North America for us. And I'm going to hand it over to Selena to do a quick intro and get ourselves started. Thank you, Selena.
Thanks, Todd. And hi, everyone. I also want to welcome you. Thanks for joining us today. I'm a vice president at Anglepoint. I've been with the organization going on 6 years now. And I've been in the software licensing, compliance, and software asset management space for over 18 years now. Spent nearly 10 of those years working for a vendor of Microsoft. I also spent a few years in the reseller space doing SAM for them. And fast forward to today, I wear a couple of different hats at Anglepoint. The first is I lead our core licensing services department, which is made up of 4 of our largest delivery teams, that being IBM, Microsoft, Oracle, and SAP. We call that core within Anglepoint because it happens to be where our customers either have the most spend or the greatest risk, or both. So I am also responsible, my other hat is I'm wearing is the Converge partnership on the Anglepoint side, which is what brings me here to this webinar today. The topic of our discussion today is the strategic importance of software asset management. So we'll be talking about some of the fundamental aspects, and to do that, we need to first establish what SAM is, what SAM is not, why SAM is strategic, some of the many benefits, along with some real examples that we have to share with you. Before we close, we'll also share with you how you can get a copy of the latest SAM Managed Services research that was released by Gartner in August. So before we get too far into that agenda, for those of you who are not familiar with Anglepoint or not familiar with Converge, we just have a quick commercial. And so you can have a little bit of background on who we are, what we do. Anglepoint, I'll start with some key facts around ours. We were founded in 2009. We were focused entirely on software asset management services. We're completely neutral in the sense that we don't do audits, we don't sell software, we're tool agnostic. Today, we are in 7 different countries. We've got over 110 consultants who work for us, many of whom performed audits while working with the Big 4, or they've worked directly for the software publishers or SAM tool vendors before joining us. So that has given us both a great deal of depth as well as breadth of expertise that we would need to support our clients in SAM. And last month was very exciting for us because we were recognized by Gartner as a leader in the SAM space in the first ever Magic Quadrant that they have released for SAM Managed Services. Todd?
Yes, and from a Converge perspective, since I'm guessing most of you registered through Converge, you know who we are. But Converge is the parent company, the national company. We have about 40 offices around the country in North America. I think we have over 200 salespeople now and hundreds of technical resources with hundreds of certifications. A lot of us still go by both names, our heritage names. Like, for example, I'm a Lighthouse Heritage person, now a Converge employee. There are other organizations like Chorus 360, et cetera. And we now all together are Converge, our national platform of a hybrid IT solution provider. But I'm just going to keep it at that at this point, because today is about Anglepoint and software asset management. So go ahead, Selena.
Great. So we do partner with Converge to offer a variety of different SAM services to our joint customers. Our SAM program services often begin with this 2 to 3 day workshop where our team of experts in SAM come in and they help you identify where you are today, where do you want to be, and they help you develop a plan for how you can get there. Our software publisher licensing services can help you with one or more specific publishers, and they can be either point-in-time assessments or part of a longer-term SAM managed service, which is where a great deal of our focus is. And that's very much tailored to each client based on the publishers that they need to manage, as well as the tools and the resources that they have in place. We also have a SAM tooling team that can help you not only select the right SAM tool for your organization, but can also implement that tool, all of those major SAM tools that are in the market. And they can take on the publisher onboarding piece of that, getting specific publishers onboarding into the tool as well. Last but not least, we have both an IT security arm of our business and a training arm. So we can help with training enablement for your internal resources. And we offer the ITAM certifications. We offer mainframe trainings as well as publisher licensing trainings as well.
Yeah, and Selena, sorry, I was just going to add one or two things to that, if that's okay.
Yes.
I would just say that 80% of our customers probably start with either software publishing licensing opportunities or SAM tooling opportunities. So typically there's some type of significant event in your corporate lives that say, you know what, we really have to take a better look at our licensing. And usually it's on one or two specific publishers. Now that might be a new CIO and he or she is asking about an ELA that's coming up, or it might be an audit or whatever it may be. And that will spark the software publisher licensing discussions. Or it might be, we have Aspera in this business unit and Flexera in that business unit, or we don't have any SAM tool in our enterprise. We might need somebody to help us pick one or decide if we need one at all. So I would just say that the 80-20 rule, that traditional 80-20 rule probably applies in this as well. Okay.
Yep, absolutely agree. Okay, so let's get into what software asset management is. The ITIL Best Practice Guide has one of the best definitions, in my opinion, which states that SAM is all of the infrastructure and processes necessary for the effective management, control, and protection of the software assets within an organization throughout all stages of their life cycle. So while that is helpful, I think it's also good to describe what SAM is not when you're trying to understand exactly what it is. So while a lot of our SAM exercises can be tactical, as Todd just explained, like helping to prepare for those software agreement renewals, SAM is not a one-time exercise and then you're done. It's also not just a one-person job, but many companies do start off that way, where they've given one individual some SAM responsibilities. A lot of times they also do other things in addition to SAM. That person might be part of IT, but SAM is certainly not just about IT, nor is it just about compliance or audits. And lastly, it is not just about a tool. So oftentimes when organizations may not be seeing the strategic benefits of SAM, it's because there's too much emphasis on one of those areas, or there's not enough investment being made into building out more of a formal program with the right people, process, and technology or tools. Todd, do you want to talk a little bit about why we should care about SAM?
Sure, sounds good. And this is these are a couple excerpts from the Gartner report. And what I'll say is this: I believe this summer, the first Magic Quadrant was done in this particular space for software asset management. And there's a reason for that. It's because it's becoming far more important to C-level executives, and it really is becoming more important to IT organizations across the whole. Those C-level commitments to software asset management are coming because, in general, we all need to reduce costs, especially this year with everything going on. They are looking to certainly pay for what they're using, but they don't like to pay for software or licenses that are on the shelf or not being used. So costs are definitely a big driver. At the same time, audits are also a big driver to these C-level folks. And Selena is going to get into this a little bit more in the next slide, as well as new licensing models, right? So folks are trying to figure out SaaS and cloud and all these other great things. These are all strategic, very strategic initiatives. When you're talking about business development, you have to know your underlying costs of the infrastructure, the software, the cloud, whatever it may be. That comes out in this Gartner report. Cost avoidance and cost savings is also a huge thing that comes out of this Gartner report. Typically achieving 30% of cost savings. Selena and I, we see that every day in our business. And quite frankly, that's probably on the low end for the first year. But then subsequent years, if you've done a good job in the first year, right, knock on wood, you'll save a good amount of money, and subsequent years might be a little bit smaller, like the 5%. So we think that Gartner has this pretty much right on the nose as far as their estimates are concerned. And then the last piece is, and I mentioned it before, is the audits. And I would just say, think about it this way. If the software market is changing and the licensing models are changing, those large software publishers, their revenues are changing at the same time. So those sales executives for those software publishers are thinking of new ways and creative ways, especially this year when they're not, quote unquote, pressing the flesh with their customers, right? They can't do those face-to-face activities. They're trying to find new ways to generate revenue from their existing customer base. Unfortunately for all of us, unfortunately for you customers, one of those ways is to audit. So I actually believe that Gartner definitely has this correct, that 65% of respondents reported at least one software vendor audit in the previous 12 months. If they were to take that same exact survey, if you will, at the end of this year, I would believe these numbers are low. What we're experiencing in the field is that there are more and more audits than even Gartner might be reporting in this report. It's not that Gartner did a bad job, it's just this year times are changing a little bit. So anyways, just wanted to touch on those couple of points, Selena, and hand it back to you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll add to that, the number of clients that we've seen who are facing multiple audits at the same time within a given year has also increased a lot. So not just having to deal with one every year, but maybe 2 or 3 at the same time. Okay, so the strategic benefits of SAM. We've got 4 main areas here where software asset management benefits an organization. The first is around reducing your risk, legal, financial, reputational, liabilities. Obviously, it's very well known that SAM helps with reducing your compliance exposure, the misuse of your software assets if you don't understand those product terms, and of course, unsupported software, which we're going to talk a little bit more about. I am going to do a little deeper dive of these 4 areas by giving you some real examples that we have from actual client deliverables, how we've worked with our clients to use SAM insights and SAM data to drive and demonstrate these benefits to their organizations. Todd mentioned how SAM can help reduce spend. This is a really key area. Obviously, as you start off, those percentages are much higher. But it allows you to create processes to identify where you can reuse licenses, also helps with limiting things like rogue purchases, helps with your chargeback process, as well as forecasting what your future needs might be based on any past usage. A third very key area of a benefit of SAM is maximizing your existing investments. So we want to make sure that based on what you're already spending, you're maximizing that, you're realizing the full benefits of your software, of your SAM tooling, all of those things, and you're really driving optimization proactively with everything that you do. And when we get into the dynamics of things like virtualization, and how can you consolidate your server environment or make your infrastructure support the software licensing. It's really critical to understand how all of that comes together, and SAM is a huge part of that. And then last but not least, negotiating strategically. SAM allows you to negotiate from a knowledgeable position, so you know what you're using, you know what you're going to need. It allows you to make very good decision making so that you don't end up in an agreement where you are overpaying or where you may be out of compliance from the get-go. So I mentioned we're going to look at some examples. Most of the time, software asset management is associated with reducing compliance risk. As we work to identify where you may have license shortages, whether those can be remediated. But with the example that I've given on this slide, we're showing how you can use the same SAM data to also identify where you may have IT security risk from tracking unmanaged devices, as well as servers that are running unsupported software, which we know are going to create greater vulnerabilities in the environment. On the reduced spend, SAM can really, if you are leveraging that data to avoid unnecessary software spends, by monitoring the usage on an ongoing basis, you can identify what we call reharvesting opportunities. So when a new user requests a piece of software, rather than you automatically making that new purchase, you're going to look instead to leverage a license that's unused instead. So it's going to help us to ensure that we're not buying more expensive licenses or any additional licenses than we really need. So in these examples, we're looking at that usage. We're also looking at where can we go with lower editions or less expensive editions, such as standard over professional or enterprise, for example. All right, maximizing your investments. We know that we pay a great deal of money for the software that we need. And one of the best things that SAM can help with is ensuring that that investment you're making is maximized. And by that, I mean that you are taking the full advantage of every benefit and use right that the vendor includes with that license. And the example that we've shown here is with Microsoft Software Assurance Benefits, where they provide an Azure hybrid benefit that allows an organization to run Windows Server both on premises and in Azure. So you can reduce your overall monthly spend than if you were just doing the pay-as-you-go in Azure versus your traditional software that you have on premise. And in this example that we've shown, we were able to help a client to leverage those benefits and save them as much as $16 million in a single year. And then their SAM team began partnering with the other business units to put the right policies in place that allowed them to continuously improve their total cost of ownership and the return on investment of those assets going forward. Okay, and then the fourth example that we do have on how SAM helps is first negotiating strategically. You can involve your SAM team throughout the negotiation process, and you can start that early, sometimes as much as 12 months ahead of the next renewal. We have seen a lot of success with a framework that we've developed with our clients where we start with that fresh baseline. We're looking at the data from the SAM license position, we understand what our usage is, and then we use that information to kick everything off from there. We start to discuss the roadmap. We can then forecast what our future needs would be so that any recommendations that we're making internally, we have those before any actual negotiations are going to begin with that actual software vendor. So you're in a position of knowledge, you know what you need, you know what can be removed, you know what can be right-sized, you have an idea of what is more of a nice to have, what changes may have occurred since the last agreement was signed and how those might impact the organization. So when you renew, you're going to do that with a great deal of confidence that the new agreement that you have is the right fit moving forward before you get locked into that again.
Yeah, and Selena, what I would add to this is this is ultimately where everybody wants to get, and you want to negotiate strategically from a point of confidence, right? And this is really particular to those software publishers that do ELAs or EAs or some type of enterprise agreement. Traditionally, they try to get customers on their heels, and they do that with maybe information of what they've bought previously or what they've used previously. But if you know exactly, right down to the line item, what you are using and what you need, you can negotiate from confidence and maybe get out of those 3-4 multi-year agreements and make your life a little bit more simple. So, I mean, this is from a cost perspective, this is the ultimate goal, is to negotiate strategically with your software publishers. And then, you know, SAM also helps in other ways. A lot of this is just kind of, you know, logic. It makes sense. We streamline the IT processes through standards driven by the SAM policies that you're going to get working with Anglepoint and our SAM practice. So what does that really mean? It means today people probably do things in many different ways across many different business units, across many different publishers. Maybe you've consolidated things into a procurement department, or maybe you have a SAM organization. But the bottom line is, if you can streamline the IT processes through SAM, then you're probably going to save money and have a lot less risk going forward, right? Reducing person hours and limiting business disruption caused by audits. We just finished one a couple of months ago where we asked the customer if they would mind sharing how many hours they have spent on an audit, and it was over 1,300 hours for one particular software audit. That's quite a bit. That's quite a large business disruption. It also costs a lot of money and losing focus of what they should be doing. Obviously, SAM is going to contribute significantly to IT governance policies and practices. A big thing is closing the loop. So SAM is great and you get great results, but if you don't go ahead and take those results and close the loop back to your IT governance policies and practices, then you're not getting the full benefits of SAM. So how can you close that loop between governance and SAM? We can help you achieve those goals as well. Obviously, the data from the past usage and trends are going to help you forecast better. But what we do is we take that even a step further, is when we're doing our interviews or questionnaires, if you will, with the different product owners in an organization, we try to get some type of view on your 6-month, 12-month, 24-month, 36-month. What's your view of this? So you can project and actually do agreements, if you will, negotiate agreements based on not only your past usage, but your future projections and forecasts. And then lastly is we are starting to do a lot more of these. And what I mean by that is we're doing a lot more publisher prioritization exercises. And I think, Celine, if you just go to the next slide, it might be easier to talk about this topic with the next slide. So we're trying to help customers prioritize their portfolio of software publishers. And we're trying to do that based on spend. We're trying to do that based on risk. We're trying to do that based on other potential exposures or strategic value to the business or the entity we're working with. So we have created this publisher prioritization and planning exercise that ultimately ends up with a plan on a page where I have a customer right now. Their software spend on an annual basis is just under $60 million. That is about 80% of their software spend. We have identified their top 26 software publishers that comprise that $60 million in spend, and we're helping to stack rank and put those into buckets. So the first bucket might be the red bucket you see in this slide on the right, where it talks about stratified management approach. Those first 5, 6, 10 software publishers, we have to get on them right away. There's a high risk, there's a high spend. We want to get on those right now in the first year. The next grouping of software publishers in this particular stratified management approach would be represented in the yellow, where we're saying, okay, great, we want to go ahead and go to the next 10, the next 8, or whatever it may be, but they may not be on the front burner of the stove at the moment. And then you have your kind of your long tails that, to be honest, from a risk perspective or a cost perspective, we may or may not want to actually do a SAM engagement with them at any point in time. But all of that will ultimately be done in this publisher prioritization exercise and plan on a page, if you will, that you can see this calendar and see the schedule, when you're going to tackle what, why you're going to tackle them, and hopefully project what type of savings and risks you'll be able to reduce in the process.
And I'll just add, I like kind of closing with this slide because it is a more strategic exercise to do. So a great way to start off, since our topic today was around the strategic nature of SAM. Okay, I mentioned at the start that Gartner had released its first ever Magic Quadrant for SAM managed services last month. We are going to share a link with you in the chat now where you can go to obtain the report if you're interested. You can download that, research, learn more about what you should be looking for in a SAM managed services provider, as well as how Gartner differentiates the major providers that are in the market today. And with that, we may have, looks like we have a few minutes left for any questions.
Yeah, so please go ahead and send your questions if you have them. We already have a few of them. I think this first question is probably targeted to me, Selena. The question is, you mentioned benefits of limiting man hours on audits. Can you avoid audits entirely? So the answer is yes and no, right? So there are some publishers that provide, I guess, if you will, audit protection if you do SAM, but I would say the lion's share of them, over 90%, do not. One in particular is IBM with their IASP program. Selena, do you want to spend a couple minutes talking about that and how you can indeed potentially get audit protection from IBM?
Yeah, IBM is actually one of the only publishers today that offers a program where they do provide a benefit around audit protection. So they have the authorized SAM partner program. If you have a managed service with one of the 4 authorized providers, Anglepoint is one of those 4. We're actually the only non-auditing firm to have that accreditation. Then we can report to IBM on your behalf and work with you to give them what they need. And then in that exchange, one of the major benefits is that you will not be audited as part of that program. Today, they are one of the only publishers who are offering that true indemnification.
Yeah, the true audit protection. So Selena, I think this next question is probably also for you. Does Anglepoint have some sort of tool to help? So from my experience, Selena, sometimes there's a little confusion of, does Anglepoint compete with Flexera, for example? So I don't know if you could, I think that's probably where this question is coming from.
Yep, I can take that one. We do not have a tool. Anglepoint does have a delivery platform called Elevate that houses some scripts that we can provide, but essentially our approach, I mentioned in the beginning, is tool agnostic. So we want to work with the existing tools that you have in place today. We want to make sure that we can make this a repeatable process. So we do not have a tool. We do not sell a tool. We try to work with you to develop the best approach based on what you have or what we think you need, and go from there.
Okay, I got another one here. How long does it take for you to get familiar with the customer environment, and what is the duration of the average engagement?
Okay, so great question. It's publisher dependent. Some of the engagements could be done in as quickly as a month, I'd say. Others may take several months when the estate for that, let's say IBM is particularly large. So there is a range, but if I had to pick an average, I would say probably 3 months is a good average. But will certainly depend on factors of how large the organization is, how much software they're actually consuming, and the publisher themselves, the tools as well. Yeah, and then what was the second part of that?
I think you answered it. It was about the duration. What I was going to add is, I think The bigger ones typically take longer, with the exception of Microsoft. Microsoft is a pretty quick hitter, right, Selena? Microsoft is, a couple of months, whereas the IBMs and the Oracles might take a little bit longer. I'm sure that's not a surprise to anybody. But there is a range, and it is software publisher dependent. But that's something, if you contacted your Converge sales rep, we could certainly engage in those discussions to give you a little bit more detail if you were interested in a particular publisher. And then I know we're a minute over, Kata. There are more questions. I think there are several more questions. It might be best if we point them to the email address on the slide. What do you think, Kata, or should I keep going?
Yep. Let's be respectful of everyone's time, and if we did not get to your question, we will email you after the webinar. And if you have any additional questions that you did not ask, you can please email sam@convergetp.com, and we would be happy to answer it. Additionally, please be on the lookout for an email containing a recording of this session, and we'll actually put in a link to the Gartner MQ as well. So thank you, Todd. Thank you, Selena. Thank you, everyone, for joining, and have a great day.